The texts that I have chosen to review for Project 1 Review of a Translated Text are the Yoga Sutras of
Patanjali.
This text overall contains 196 sutras from the early ages of the CE and the
Patanjali.
in India. A sutra is a written rule in the Sanskrit language based on Hindu philosophy. The Yoga Sutras are a set of spoken rules in Hinduism that have been written and compiled by a man named
Patanjali. Patanjali.
He was a sage in ancient India. There is not much to be known about
Patanjali.
other than him being a known Hindu philosopher and that he was the first to write down any sort of Hindu sutra. The Yoga Sutras are organized into 4 sections. The first being the
Samadhi Pada.
which includes 51 sutras about enlightenment and the process of ending worldly suffering. Then there is the
Sadhana Pada.
which is 55 sutras describing the basics of preliminary yogic practice. There is also the 4th section called the
Kaivalya Pada.
which consists of 34 sutras about finally reaching
Moksha.
which is spiritual release. And then I finally bring your attention to the 3rd section of the Yoga Sutras. This is the
Vibhuti Pada. Vibhuti Pada.
It contains 56 sutras, and one of the main themes of this section is transcending earthly-based consciousness, or in other words, obtaining supernatural powers. This can be quite controversial in modern times because there are many skeptics, especially in the Western Hemisphere, who passionately believe that superpowers are a strictly fictional idea. However,
Patanjali.
he records into the Yoga Sutras that if you achieve
Moksha.
and master the separation of soul and matter, you can achieve supernatural powers. The sutras are a particularly informative read for most people because even though they are not something that normally a stranger on the street would have even heard of, it can be incredibly compelling to read about something that a whole other culture believes to be fact. One thing that is exceedingly difficult about reading this book is unbelievably the actual reading part. The Yoga Sutras were translated from ancient Hindu texts, first in 1890 and then revised later in 1934 by M.N.
Trivedi.
It included the original Hindu Sanskrit for each sutra along with the romanization of it so that the readers can read along with the Sanskrit. This makes it much easier for readers who are using the Yoga Sutras to practice actual Hindu rituals, in which reading mantras is especially important. Despite this being such an old book and old language, every word that I did not recognize or understand was thoroughly explained right next to it. Instead of using half of the page for translation footnotes like many other translators do and making readers lose their place on the page, he uses the format of kasana or moment, or he'll put the Hindu word with the translation directly next to it in parentheses. This makes the flow of reading the sutras indefinitely easier. In the beginning of the book, calls on 2 other scholars, Govindadeva Sastrin or Dr.
Rajendralal Mitra,
who have also translated the Yoga Sutras
Patanjali.
for different publishers.
Trivedi.
Explains that in his translation of the sutras, he's attempting to compile all the sutras that previous translators have written into one to be easiest to understand in English for the reader. The way the book is formatted leaves only a small amount for margin annotations. However, if you really do want to fit small notes in between the margins, you still can. Most translations for the Yoga Sutras tend to stray further and further from the original text as time goes on because of the limited knowledge on Hindu customs. Govindadeva Sastri, who was called out earlier by Trivedi, is a professor with a different translation of the sutras himself. He says that Western scholars who are reading the Yoga Sutras do not have an appropriate amount of knowledge on
This
is the basic structure of Hindu theology. The idea that everything around us, including you and me, are an essential part of God, or essentially a deity. That
Patanjali.
usually assumes previous knowledge on philosophy of
Sankhya.
or the analysis of the universe. As a result, there is a significant proof of domestication as
Trivedi.
translates the text almost entirely for the Western audience to read, rather than keeping the original context of the sutras. Overall, this read is incredibly beneficial if you're interested in other religions or philosophy. Otherwise, I would not bother reading something this long and hard to understand.